The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It came down in waves, soft at times, like whispers brushing against the windows, and then suddenly violent, as if the sky itself were grieving something it couldn't name. In the quiet suburb of Brookhaven, nestled just 20 minutes outside Atlanta, the streets glistened with wet reflections, cars passing by, headlights bleeding across puddles like memories that refused to dry. Inside one of the sprawling mansions on Silverstone Lane, a woman stood at the edge of the kitchen island, wringing out a soaked dish towel. Her name was Camila Duarte, and she had never belonged in a place like that. Not really. She'd arrived in the U.S. 10 years ago from Sao Paulo, carrying a duffel bag, a heart shattered by betrayal, and a promise she'd made to herself. My son will have everything I didn't. That promise had carried her through the back-breaking jobs, the cold winters, and the cruel glances of people who mistook her accent for ignorance. Camila worked as a housekeeper for the Livingstons, a wealthy family with skin-deep smiles and secrets buried under marble floors. Their son, Ethan, was barely a ghost in that house, always away, always busy. And when he did appear, it was only in photographs or framed degrees hung in hallways she wasn't allowed to clean. Until that day. The day everything shifted didn't start with lightning or some grand celestial sign. It started with silence. A silence so thick it made her stomach twist. Camila had arrived at the house at 6:30 sharp, just like always. But something was different. The front door was slightly open. That door was always locked. She hesitated. In her mind, flashes of warning surfaced. Don't meddle, don't question, just clean and leave. That's how you survive in a country that barely knows your name. But something made her push it open. Slowly. Quietly. Like peeling back the page of a story she wasn't sure she was supposed to read. And there he was. For the first time in 5 years, Ethan Livingston stood inside that house, wet from the rain, hair tousled, wearing a gray hoodie that did little to hide the sadness in his eyes. He was leaning against the staircase, looking down at his phone, unaware of her presence. But when he looked up, something shifted in the air. He didn't flinch. Didn't pretend she wasn't there. He looked at her like a man who'd been running for too long and had just remembered what it felt like to stop. Camila didn't move. She wanted to. But her body didn't obey. It wasn't attraction, not then. It was recognition. A kind of soul-level familiarity that made her chest ache. She swallowed hard. I didn't know anyone was home. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in hours. Just got back. Camila nodded, then looked away, hoping the heat rising to her cheeks wasn't obvious. She resumed wiping the counter, her hands trembling ever so slightly. Ethan didn't say anything else, and neither did she. But something had started. Something that would unravel the walls around them, layer by layer, until the truth no one wanted to face came pouring out like floodwater. At home that night, Camila didn't tell her son, Leo, about Ethan. She cooked dinner like always, rice, beans, and grilled chicken, watching the boy she'd given everything for, his 12-year-old face lit by the glow of his tablet. Leo was her heartbeat, her anchor. And he didn't know that his mother's world had cracked open just a little that day. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was the beginning of a war she didn't know she was about to fight. Because people like Ethan didn't fall for maids. Not in real life. And especially not in houses like that. But the next morning, she found something strange, a cup of coffee waiting for her in the kitchen. Still warm. Black, just the way she liked it. No note. No explanation. Just a cup. Sitting there like a dare. She stared at it for several seconds, her heart thumping too loud in her chest. Was it a mistake? A coincidence? Or had he really remembered what she said months ago, in passing, while cleaning near the dining table? I don't like sugar in coffee. Makes it feel fake. She had muttered more to herself than anyone. The next day, the coffee was there again. And the next. By the 5th day, she couldn't take it anymore. When she saw him walking toward the door, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark jeans, she stopped him. Her voice came out firmer than she expected. You don't have to do that. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Do what? The coffee. He smiled. And God, it wasn't the kind of smile that men gave women like her. It wasn't rehearsed or predatory or careless. It was safe. Real. I know I don't have to, he said. That's why I do it. That night, Camilla stood in the shower for too long, water pounding against her back like guilt. She didn't know what she was guilty of. Hope. Loneliness. Wanting something she had no right to want? But it was too late. The loops had begun. In small gestures. In stolen glances. In moments so quiet they screamed. And somewhere in that mansion, where everything was supposed to be cold and distant, something impossibly warm had started to bloom. She just didn't know yet that warmth, in places like that, always comes with a price. A price she wasn't ready to pay. Not yet. But the story was already unfolding. And the storm wasn't over. Not even close. The following Monday, Camilla arrived earlier than usual. The streets were still wet, and the morning held that soft gray fog that made everything feel like it was waiting for something or someone. She walked into the Levingston residence with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her place, and the torment of someone who wasn't sure if that place was shifting. The kitchen was empty. No coffee. She didn't know why that hit her so hard. It shouldn't have. She wasn't entitled to it. Wasn't supposed to care. But still, her chest tightened. That was when she saw him. Ethan was in the living room, seated on the floor, barefoot, surrounded by photo albums that looked untouched for years. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting him in gold and shadow. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't have to. His voice met her halfway. I found a picture of my mother when she was about your age. Camilla froze mid-step. It was the first time he'd ever said something so personal. So exposed. I never noticed how tired she looked, he added. Even in the fancy dresses. Even when she was smiling. Camilla didn't respond. She didn't know if she was allowed to. She hated this house, he said finally, glancing at her. But she never left. There was something behind his eyes. Not just pain. Something older than that. A kind of grief that doesn't scream anymore, just sits inside you like rust. Camilla shifted her weight, her hands still damp from the spray bottle she carried. Why are you telling me this? Because you look at this place the same way she did. That struck something deep inside her, sharp and familiar. You don't know how I look at anything, she said, more defensive than she meant. Ethan smiled faintly. I know how people look when they want to be anywhere else. Camilla's throat tightened. She turned back toward the kitchen. This was dangerous. Whatever this was. She needed to put a stop to it before it became something that didn't have a name. Something that wouldn't survive outside stolen moments and invisible lines. But fate, cruel and cunning, wasn't done playing. That afternoon, while dusting the upper hallway, she heard raised voices downstairs. Mr. Levingston. Ethan. The kind of argument that came from years of silence finally cracking. You walk in here like you've earned the right to be angry, his father's voice boomed. And you pretend this place didn't rot us from the inside out. Ethan snapped back. Camilla moved without sound, back pressed against the wall, heart hammering like she'd done something wrong just by hearing it. You want to play savior now? Mr. Levingston barked. Don't insult me. There was a long pause. Then Ethan's voice, low, wounded. I'm not trying to save anyone. Another pause. Then the front door slammed so violently the walls seemed to flinch. For the rest of the day, the house was hollow. Camilla worked in silence, but her mind was a storm. She thought about Leo. About how he sometimes clenched his jaw in frustration when he couldn't explain his feelings. About how often she bit her tongue at work, swallowed her opinions, disguised her intelligence, because survival didn't leave space for honesty. That night, she sat beside her son as he did homework at their small kitchen table. Why do rich people always look sad? Leo asked suddenly, eyes still glued to his math book. Camila blinked. What do you mean? I saw a video at school today. A rich guy with like, a crazy house and cars and stuff. But he didn't smile. Not once. She studied her son's face. So young. So sharp. Maybe some people have so much of everything, she said slowly, that they forget what anything feels like. Leo nodded, as if that made perfect sense. But inside, Camila was reeling. Because she was beginning to feel something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Curiosity. Not about Ethan's money, or his world, but about his silence. About the ache behind his eyes. The same ache she saw in herself every time she passed by a mirror and didn't look long enough to see the cracks. She told herself it was nothing. That it would pass. That it had to. But hearts don't listen to logic. They listen to patterns. To glances. To cups of coffee that stop showing up. And to the sudden, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, you've been seen. For the first time. And not looked away from. Not yet. The morning air felt heavier than usual. Not cold. Just full. Like the sky was holding something it hadn't decided to release yet. Camila arrived earlier again. A habit now. Not because she needed the hours, but because silence had become the only place where her thoughts could run freely, before the weight of everything, and everyone, returned. But that day, the silence wasn't alone. Ethan was already in the kitchen. Not standing. Not moving. Sitting on the floor, back against the cabinet beneath the sink, like he had fallen there from some emotional height. He was dressed in the same hoodie from last week, his eyes red-rimmed, not from sleep, but from the absence of it. Camila didn't say anything. She just watched him for a long moment, trying to remember if she'd ever seen a man that still. He finally looked up. I didn't know where else to go, he said softly, voice raw like torn fabric. You live here, she replied, keeping her tone even. He shook his head. I don't think I do. Camila stepped toward the counter and began pulling out supplies. Clean cloths. The lemon-scented spray he hated. She needed to do something with her hands. Anything. Because his presence, so close, so stripped, was undoing something in her. What happened? She asked, not looking at him. I tried to walk away from all of it. The business. The meetings. The fake dinners with people who don't know how to ask real questions. He paused. And I realized I don't know how to be a person outside of what they built. That struck her somewhere deep. You sound like someone who wants to disappear, she said quietly. Ethan let out a dry laugh. No. I want to exist. For once. On my own terms. Camila turned to him then, her eyes narrowing just slightly. And what does that mean to you, Ethan? You want to exist so you come talk to the maid? That's your rebellion. The words were sharper than she intended. But she didn't take them back. Because part of her, an old, wounded part, wanted him to feel what it was like to be reminded of a line you're not allowed to cross. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. Don't call yourself that, he said. That's what I am. No, he said again, firmer this time. That's just what they call you. That's not who you are. Camila's heart stuttered. No one had ever said it like that before. Not in this country. Not with that kind of clarity. And it scared her. Because there's a moment, always, when someone starts to see you. Really see you. And you have to decide if you'll let them. Or if you'll run. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake next to the soft, rhythmic breathing of her son, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers. But ceilings never give you anything except time to think. And that was the problem. She thought about Ethan's eyes. Not the color. But the way they didn't look away when she snapped at him. The way they stayed. She thought about the way he said her name that morning. Not Maid. Not Miss. Just Camila. As if it had always belonged to someone he knew, even if he didn't yet know why. The next day, something changed. Not between them. Inside her. She still cleaned. Still scrubbed the same baseboards, folded the same linens. But something had shifted behind her movements. She was paying attention, not to the house, but to the energy inside it. She noticed when Ethan lingered in the hallway, pretending to check emails on his phone. She noticed when he stood a little too long near the stairwell, listening for the sound of her footsteps. And he noticed her noticing. But neither of them said anything. Because something unspoken had taken root, and unspoken things are the most dangerous kind. That afternoon, as she was loading laundry into the machine, he appeared in the doorway. She didn't jump. She didn't pretend she hadn't noticed him. She just kept folding. Until he said her name. Camila. She looked up. I'm sorry if I crossed a line. She didn't answer right away. The room smelled like lavender and steam, and the dryer hummed softly like a secret being told in another room. You didn't cross it, she finally said. You just stood close enough to make me wonder if I'd drawn it too deep. Ethan's breath caught. For a moment, they just stared at each other. And there it was again. Not desire. Not yet. But the ache of two people who had spent too long pretending they were invisible. And suddenly, the house didn't feel as big. Or as cold. Just quiet. And waiting. That Friday morning, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed on the surface. The same polished floors, the same manicured hedges, the same echo in the hallways when she walked alone. But something in the air had shifted. Like the house itself was holding its breath. Camila walked into the foyer and instantly knew Ethan was home again. Not by sight. By presence. There was a quiet stillness that followed him. Like when someone leaves a piano half played in a room and the keys still hum with what was almost said. She found him in the reading room. Not reading. Just sitting. Staring at a closed book in his lap like the words inside might betray him if he opened them. He looked up the moment she entered, and for a second, just a second, he smiled. Not out of politeness. Out of relief. Camila offered nothing in return. She couldn't. If she gave him anything right then, it would be more than she could afford. But even silence speaks. Especially when shared by two people afraid of what they might hear if they speak too loudly. He stood up slowly, careful, like he didn't want to startle the moment into fleeing. I was thinking, he began, about what you said. About drawing lines too deep. Camila felt her hands tense around the cloth she held. That was just a thought. Not an invitation. I know, he said. But it made me think anyway. She moved toward the window, wiping it with gentle circles. Thinking can be dangerous. He let out a low breath. You sound like someone who's learned that the hard way. She turned to face him, slowly. I sound like someone who doesn't get second chances. For the first time, Ethan's expression cracked. Not in shock. Not in disagreement. In understanding. I'm not looking for a second chance, he said. I'm just tired of pretending that nothing means anything. Camila didn't move. Didn't blink. The words hung between them like a rope waiting to snap or hold. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Just enough to feel. What's your story, Camila? He asked, gently. The real one. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know where to begin without bleeding. So she changed the subject. Leo has a presentation at school today, she said. He's nervous. Ethan's eyes softened. He's smart. He'll be fine. Camila's brows lifted. You remember his name. Of course I do. She looked away again. The window was already clean. But she kept wiping. He wants to be an engineer, she murmured. Says he's going to build a house one day, just for me. With a real garden. And a room just for silence. Ethan smiled. A room just for silence. I like that. He says silence is the only thing nobody can take from you. The words hit the room like thunder without warning. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Until Ethan broke it. "Can I meet him?" Camila turned slowly, her entire body stiffening. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because," he said carefully, "I think he's already the part of you that you protect the most. And I want to understand the parts of you you don't show." She laughed, but it wasn't warm. It was bitter. Hollow. "You don't get to understand me, Ethan. That's not how this works." He didn't argue. He just nodded. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to cross." "You didn't cross anything," she interrupted, her voice trembling now. "You're just walking too close. And I can't afford to fall if you change direction." There it was. The real truth. Not about coffee or glances or quiet conversations in rooms meant for people like him. It was about gravity. About what happens when someone starts pulling you toward something you don't think you deserve, and you're terrified that one day they'll wake up and realize they were never meant to pull you at all. Ethan didn't step closer. Didn't retreat either. He just stood there, like he understood the danger of his own presence. And for once, he didn't try to fix it. He just let it be. Camila left that day with more weight in her chest than she'd arrived with. Not from guilt. From hope. And that was always heavier. That night, as Leo proudly showed her a photo of the model he built from cardboard and duct tape, she smiled and nodded and clapped, and said all the right things. But her mind was elsewhere. On another house. With bigger rooms. With windows she couldn't clean fast enough to hide what was happening behind them. She thought about Ethan's eyes. His stillness. His voice when he said her name like it wasn't foreign in his mouth. And she knew. This wasn't a story about status. It wasn't even about love. Not yet. It was about danger. The kind that doesn't knock. It just waits. Until you open the door. And forget to close it behind you. Sunday mornings used to be her favorite. Not because they were restful. Rest was a luxury Camila hadn't tasted in years, but because they were predictable. Leo watching cartoons in the living room. Her brewing coffee in silence. The whole world moving just slow enough for her to breathe between the chaos. But not this one. This Sunday felt sharp. Too still. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, it warns. Camila stood at the kitchen sink, drying the same cup over and over. Leo was at a friend's house, and for the first time in weeks, she had the morning to herself. Or so she thought. A knock at the door broke the rhythm of her thoughts. 3 soft taps. Measured. Intentional. Her stomach turned before her feet did. She opened the door slowly, half expecting to see a neighbor, or a package, or no one at all. But it was Ethan. Standing there. Holding a book in one hand and uncertainty in the other. He looked out of place on her front step. Too tall. Too clean. Like the universe had dropped a man from another world onto her doormat and expected her to know what to do with him. She didn't speak. Neither did he. For a moment, the only thing that moved was the wind, tugging gently at the edges of his jacket. "I wasn't going to come," he said finally. "But I kept thinking about what you said. About falling." She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just held the door like a shield between them. "I'm not here to confuse you," he added. "Or complicate anything." Camila's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then why are you here?" Ethan looked down at the book in his hand, a worn copy of something old and honest. "I wanted to give you this," he said. "It was my mother's. She used to read it when things got too loud." Camila stared at it. She didn't reach for it. Didn't invite him in. But something inside her cracked. Not open. Just enough to let the light through. Ethan didn't push. He simply placed the book on the small wooden table near the door, nodded once, and turned to leave. But before he reached the stairs, she called after him. "Wait." He stopped, hands in his pockets, not turning around. "You want to know who I am?" she asked, her voice steadier now. I do. Camilla stepped out of the doorway. Into the light. Into the moment. I came here 10 years ago with a baby and a bag full of clothes I didn't pack. I left my country because staying meant becoming a ghost. And I cleaned houses not because I lacked dreams, but because dreams don't pay rent when you don't speak the language of power. Ethan turned then. She continued. Everything I have, I earned through silence. Through doing the things no one sees. And I raised my son to believe that dignity doesn't come from titles, it comes from waking up and trying. Her eyes met his. And now you show up on my doorstep with poetry and eyes that don't look away, and I don't know what you want from me. Ethan walked back slowly. I don't want anything from you, he said. I just want to be with you. Wherever that's allowed. The words landed hard. Because they were soft. And softness, after years of armor, can feel like a knife. Camilla felt her pulse in places she'd forgotten existed. She stepped back inside and gestured subtly. He entered. And the air inside the apartment changed. Not because of who he was. But because of what he didn't bring with him, expectation. Pity. Superiority. He brought silence. And stayed in it with her. They sat on the worn couch, too close for comfort, too far for honesty. Leo's drawings lined the walls. A half-cooked pot of feijoa simmered in the background. And still, Ethan didn't speak. He just looked around. Took in the details. The chipped photo frames. The books with torn covers. The life she'd built from nothing. You've made a home, he said softly. Camilla nodded. Brick by brick. Dish by dish. Hug by hug. And then, without thinking, without planning, she reached for his hand. Just for a second. Just enough to feel the warmth. It was the first time she'd touched someone with no duty attached to it in years. And that brief contact held everything unsaid, the ache, the fear, the unbearable weight of wanting. They didn't kiss. They didn't confess. They just sat. In a silence that finally felt like safety. But safety is never permanent. Especially when the world outside doesn't forgive the kind of closeness they were beginning to entertain. Camilla knew that. And so did Ethan. Which is why, when he left an hour later, they both hesitated at the door. Not because they didn't want more. But because they knew what more would cost. And neither of them had enough change left in their pockets. Not yet. It happened on a Thursday. The kind of day that doesn't warn you. No thunder. No trembling in the air. Just another sky pretending to be harmless. Camilla had just finished organizing the upstairs closets when Mrs. Livingston returned home early. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. What was, though, was the silence that followed her arrival. The kind of silence that doesn't come from absence, but from calculation. Camilla descended the stairs slowly, her instincts already on edge. And there, standing at the base of the staircase, arms crossed and lips thin with suspicion, was Evelyn Livingston. And beside her, Ethan. He looked different. Not in his clothes or posture, but in his eyes. Caught. Not in an act. In a truth. Camilla, Evelyn said, voice sharp as broken glass. Would you like to explain why my son has been spending time at your apartment? The room tilted slightly. Not from shame. From recognition. It had finally happened. The invisible line had been crossed. And now it had a witness. Ethan stepped forward. Mom, stop. But she held up her hand. Don't defend her. Don't embarrass yourself further. Camilla swallowed, her spine straight. I didn't ask him to come, she said, her voice even. And I didn't hide it either. Oh, how noble, Evelyn snapped. Let me guess, he found your tragic story inspiring? Your hard life? Your son's drawings on the wall? You women always know exactly which string to pull. Camilla didn't flinch. Not because the words didn't cut, but because they only confirmed what she already knew. This world was never going to make space for her. Not without demanding something in return. Ethan turned to his mother, his voice trembling. "You don't know anything about her." "I know enough," she hissed. "I know what this looks like. I know what people will say. And I know what we will lose." Camila stepped forward now. One small step. But enough to shift the air. "You think this is about money," she said, eyes locked on Evelyn's. "Or power. Or some fantasy your son is acting out." Evelyn's jaw clenched. Camila continued. "But what terrifies you isn't that he might ruin his reputation. It's that he might not. That maybe, just maybe, he's not ashamed of being close to someone like me. And that makes you question everything you built this house to protect." Ethan's eyes burned. Not with anger. With pride. Because for the first time, Camila wasn't cleaning the floor beneath their feet. She was standing on it. As an equal. And it was unbearable for a woman like Evelyn. "You're fired," she said coldly. "Effective immediately." Camila didn't argue. Didn't plead. She turned to Ethan. Her voice softened. "You don't have to choose." He blinked. "What?" "You don't have to prove anything. Not to her. Not to me. But you do need to ask yourself something, Ethan." He stepped closer. "What?" She reached for his hand, gently. "Is this about love, or escape?" The silence that followed was sacred. Not empty. Full. Of memories. Of mornings in the kitchen. Of her laugh echoing off walls that had never held joy before. Of Leo showing him how to draw with broken crayons and unbreakable hope. Of what it felt like to sit in her living room, surrounded by nothing expensive, but everything real. Ethan held her gaze. "It's both," he said finally. "I didn't know the difference until I met you." Camila smiled, but it was the kind of smile that holds tears just behind it. "I believe you," she said. "But that doesn't make this easier." He squeezed her hand. "So what now?" And there it was. The question they had both avoided. The future, staring at them through the cracked glass of the present. She stepped back, slowly. "I need to build something for myself," she whispered. "Not with borrowed bricks. Not inside someone else's castle." He nodded. Not because he agreed. But because he respected her. Sometimes, love doesn't win in public. Sometimes it survives quietly. In the way two people see each other, completely, and walk away anyway, because the world isn't ready. But someday it might be. Weeks passed. Camila found work again. Smaller houses. Simpler rooms. But in each one, she carried herself differently now. Not because of Ethan. Because of herself. Because once someone sees you, not as a service, not as a stereotype, but as sacred, you can't go back to being invisible. Leo didn't ask much about what happened. But one night, as he lay in bed, he looked up and asked, "Are you sad?" Camila kissed his forehead. "A little." "Did you love him?" She paused. Then said softly, "I still do." Leo thought for a moment. "Then maybe that's a good kind of sad." She smiled. And somewhere across town, in a penthouse with cold marble and too many rooms, Ethan stared at the book he'd once left on her table. The pages smelled faintly of lavender and feijoa. And memory. He opened it. Read one line aloud. Then closed his eyes. Some stories don't end with a kiss. They end with truth. And sometimes, that's even more powerful. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.